Good evening, everyone. First of all, I would like to express my gratitude to John for this nice introduction and also for your coming here to listen to this talk on the 5 cosmic laws explained by the Buddha under the title Pancha Niyama. Pancha means 5, Niyama means laws. And these are 5 laws that include just about everything that we can think of in this universe that sort of determines our lives. And just at the beginning, I would like to enumerate these 5 laws and then try to explain them a little bit more in detail one by one. So the first of these 5 cosmic laws is called the Bija Niyama. That means the law of the seed, S-E-E-D. You know, just like there is a seed in every fruit tree, many seeds actually, when you sow a seed of an apple tree, for instance, from an apple, and you plant it and you nurture it, it gets sunshine and rain and good soil, and you look after it, then most likely an apple tree will grow from the apple seed and not a banana tree or a mango or something like that, unless, of course, a miracle happens. But normally it will grow, you know, so the seed already contains the tree in that sense. And that is a kind of law of nature, and the law of the seed works like that. Also in human beings, we are conceived by our parents, and then sometimes we may look like our father or mother or grandfather or grandmother physically. We might even inherit some of their diseases like diabetes or something like that, which comes along what is called the physiological or the biological line of inheritance. So that is our body basically coming as one factor into this life. And then we have what is called the Uttu Niyama, which is called the law of the climate, the influence of the climate on our lives. And with climate, we don't only mean whether it's cold or hot climate, you know, like the physical climate of a place, but also the social climate in which we grow up, or the economic climate, the economic, social, political climate also. And we'll go into that a little bit later. I was just going to enumerate these laws. Then we have the Kamma Niyama, or the Karma Niyama, the law of karma, the law of cause and effect in the ethical sphere, psycho and ethical sphere. That is where you sow seeds of deeds by thought and intention, whether you're going to say or do or think something even, according to, you know, certain good or bad intentions. And that influences our life and our lives over the lifetimes quite a lot. Some people go to the extent of saying everything is ruled by karma. But the Buddha actually expounded these 5 laws of cause and effect to say that there's more than just karma. And we'll see in more detail later on. Then the 4th of these 5 niyamas is the Chitta Niyama. Chitta means the mind, actually. So the mind itself has a power of choosing, for instance. The choice of doing something or not to do something, or to do something in a different way. You can do good things, you can do bad things, you can decide not to do something. And as a human being, we tend to think that we have a certain amount of free will to determine what we are going to say and think and do. So that may be also caused by a number of uncountable previous causes which sort of limit our choices. But anyway, as a human being, we have within this level of existence, we are sort of between the animals and the higher beings. As human beings, we have a different kind of thing which we call the mind, and consciousness and self-consciousness, being aware of ourselves, having some kind of intelligence and choice. So that comes under Chitta Niyama, the law of the mind. And then the fifth of these five is called the Dhamma Niyama, or if you use the Sanskrit term, Dharma Niyama. So the Dhamma Niyama considers the natural laws, the influences of nature on our being. For instance, the influence of the sun, the moon, the stars, the different constellations, such as you have in astrology when you're born under a certain sign or under a certain constellation. That sort of determines the rest of your life already if you take your horoscope. And it is most likely or probable that your life will be going like this, according to the time of your birth. So that is also, not only that, but different kinds of influences from the stars and the moon and the sun, maybe like sun spots, sun flares, X-rays and microwaves. Nowadays, of course, with all these mobile phones working, we are slowly being microwaved, so to speak, which may not be very good for your health, but anyway, that is also, it's not a natural law, but it is an influence from the environment. And there are things like natural disasters that may happen, which may or may not have something to do with your karma, to be at the wrong time at the wrong place, for instance, such as in case of tsunamis, or earthquakes, or volcanic eruptions and things like that. So these kind of laws of cause and effect, once again shortly, the Bija Niyama, the law of the seed, then the Utta Niyama, the law of the environment, the Kamma Niyama, the law of karma, then the Chitta Niyama, the law of the mind, and the Dhamma Niyama, the law of nature or natural causes. Well, this is a quite complex and also an interdependent kind of network of causes and effect, which are not that easily understood. But when you sort of analyze them, as the Buddha has laid them down, then we can get a better view of what is actually influencing our lives. So with the law of the seed, as we said, it is your biological inheritance that you get with your birth from your parents and grandparents and your forefathers in the form of the seed. So this will determine sometimes how old we get or what kind of diseases we may get and what we look like and things like that. So there are these kind of influences which are determining part of our life, that part which is coming under the physical part. But then when you look at the second one or the third one of karma, for instance, karma, just to explain the term kamma in Pali or karma in Sanskrit, is sometimes misunderstood as if that is some kind of an agency in the sky who is keeping bookkeeping and track of every individual and determine whether they're doing good or bad things and then punishing them accordingly or rewarding them accordingly. But kamma or karma is actually the law of cause and effect in the ethical sphere, which is caused by your own intentions. The Buddha summed it up in saying, Chetanahang kammang vadami, or Chetanahang bhikkhave kammang vadami. That means, O monks, it is chetana, or the intention with which you do something, that determines your karma. It's not just a mechanical law, but it depends on with what kind of intention you think, say, and do something. So there are distinctions between what is called skillful karma, or good karma, and unskillful karma, or bad karma. So if we say unskillful karma is caused by greed, hatred, delusion, and different forms and combinations of that, and it leads to suffering or conflict or pain for oneself and for others. Whereas skillful karma or skillful intentions are based on the opposite, namely generosity, loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom, and good things like that, good states of mind. So these are called the skillful roots in our mind, which determine with what kind of an intention you think, say, and do something. You cannot do anything without having some kind of a thought or an intention. Sometimes these things happen very much subconsciously, of course. We're not aware of a certain intention that makes us do something or say something, but that doesn't mean that there's no such thing as an intention before the actual word or deed. So in that case, karma is determining our life in this lifetime, going back to when we started to do things consciously and choosing to do something. But not only that, it also goes back to previous lives. We as Buddhists and also in Hinduism, we believe in rebirth or reincarnation. Now the Buddhists, especially of the Theravada type to which I am supposed to belong, as I was ordained in the Theravada tradition, have a kind of an allergy towards the word reincarnation, because they say, oh no, there's nothing really permanent which keeps on reincarnating. It is all in a flux, everything is changing, even yourself is not a permanent self. So there's no permanent self, therefore we should not use the term reincarnate, something that is permanent, that doesn't change and takes flesh again and again, like a different body. No, the Buddha said, everything is changing, including your body, your feelings, your awareness, your intentions, and your consciousness. So it is therefore rather called rebirth. They had different kind of terminology, of course, in the Indian languages. We're just talking English here, but they had punarutbhava and punarupatti. Those are two different terms for reincarnation and rebirth. But it could just be sort of waved away by saying these are semantic sort of fineries, which, you know, there's only one process, and it doesn't matter whether you call it rebirth or reincarnation. It is a continuation of a kind of an individual who goes from life to life, and let's call it the stream of consciousness, for instance, instead of a soul or an Atman or something like that. The stream of consciousness which goes from life to life and continues after death and seeks another suitable life according to its own karma. So the karma determines from the past, or the past I should say, we are in America now, aren't we? The past. So karma determines things from the past that you have done in previous lives, and you know, it extends not just to the immediately preceding life, but also to many, many previous lifetimes, which makes it very, very complex, of course, because it's not just one cause that creates one effect, but a number of causes can create one situation or a complex effect. And that in its turn becomes another cause for another effect, and maybe several of those complex events may be causing, etc., etc. So it becomes rather difficult to pinpoint exactly which karmic act determined what happened in this particular life. Sometimes we cannot really understand why did this happen to her or to him or to me. We wonder, you know, like, I was such a good person, or she or he was such a good person, and something very bad happened to him or her, and we cannot see why that happened to them because they were so good. So it could be that they have done something bad, something terrible, in a previous life, which they have, of course, long forgotten. Because usually we don't even remember what we had for breakfast on the 12th of October last year, for instance, you know, let alone what we did in a previous lifetime. But through, well, maybe through hypnotic regression or through meditation and getting into deeper levels of jhana, and then remembering your previous lives, or sometimes spontaneous recollections of previous lives by small children, they might pinpoint to, aha, that is the cause of what's happening here. And then it can be a matter of a number of lifetimes also that something came back. And that depends on the gravity of the karma. Karma is very complex. You know, there's not only good and bad or skillful and unskillful karma, but there's also gravity of karma. Some sorts of acts are not so severe and some are very severe. Like, for instance, patricide and matricide, killing your own father or mother, is considered the worst of the bad karmas that you can do, and that can never be compensated by doing something good. You know, some people say, oh, I may have done something bad in my past, let's try and balance it out by doing some good deeds in this lifetime. But there is an example of one of the disciples of the Buddha called Moggallana. He was one of the two chief disciples, and by the end of his life, although he had become an arahat, that means the highest stage of sainthood he had already reached, he was attacked by 500 robbers and they clubbed him to death. And he realized all of a sudden that this was something to do, this had something to do with his own, that is in a previous life long ago, his own killing of his own mother. And realizing that, and being an arahat, he did not retaliate to these robbers who came to kill him, but he just let it happen without any anger or any kind of retaliation, any hatred, and he just passed away like that. So, you know, not that I want to scare you or anything like that, but you never know what might come from a previous life. You know, you might be a very good person in this life, but then it is a matter of facing the situation. Are we going to sort of recreate the same type of karma now in this lifetime, or are we learning from our previous lives and trying to do it better? Or are we able to let go of those past causes and, you know, maybe transform ourselves to a new being? That also has happened. There was a famous example in the Buddha's time of Angulimala, the man who was collecting thumbs from people whom he actually killed, and then made a what you call a mala, a kind of a string around his neck with these thumbs. And he had been misled by a teacher. You won't believe it, but you know, this is a true story anyway in Buddhism, that he was told by his teacher, if you collect 1,000 thumbs of people whom you kill, you will go to a certain heaven. I don't know how bright he was, but he believed it. And you know, that's why the Buddha said, don't believe anything just because other people tell you, or because it is mentioned in the scriptures, or even because I tell you. You have to find out for yourself whether it is good for yourself and others. And then if it's not unreasonable, and if it is good for yourself and others, you can accept it, otherwise don't. But you know, there were different kinds of sects of beliefs in those days, and this particular person followed that belief. And finally, he was going to go after his own mother to kill her and collect her thumb, and made the final, you know, thousands, what you call chain. And the Buddha, in his, well, he could have been a little bit faster than that, I suppose. In his compassion, he realized that this man is going after his own mother and he's going to kill her, and let me stop. So he projected his body in front of this man, and he was going in front of the Angulimala, and Angulimala shouted, stop! He wanted to then kill the Buddha. He thought there's another victim. And Buddha turned around and said, I have stopped long ago. It's you who is still running around. And suddenly Angulimala seems to have understood the message and became a different person. He transformed within himself. He became a kind of a reformed person, and he became actually a saint. And he was, although he had done all these horrible things in his life, and he had to undergo the karmic consequences of that, like when he went pindapata, what they call, with the begging bowl for the food. Sometimes he was stoned and yelled at and scorned and things like that. But he didn't get 14 lifetimes of imprisonment, for instance. I don't know how that worked. There were no courts like that, I suppose. But anyway, this is meant as an example of how people, however bad they are, they can still, by real reformation, you could say, of themselves, become free of the greed, hatred, and delusion type of negativities. So, because we have this complex law of karma, and some people seem to say that everything is according to karma, even the time of your birth depends on your karma. And then again, what happens to you, even if it's an accident, it could be your karma. But that is not necessarily so. According to Buddha's teaching of these 5 niyamas, there are different kinds of influences, and they not only have to do with karma alone. But karma in itself is so complex that we cannot really understand it with our limited, so-called logical mind. And, you know, probably because we do not remember also the things that happened in the past, even in this lifetime, let alone in the previous lifetimes. And so if people accept, for instance, that this must be karma, maybe they're happy. They may be quite satisfied with it. And sometimes that may be wiser than asking, why did this happen to me? Why did it happen to her? Couldn't it have been prevented or done differently? And things like that. But the Buddha called karma an achinteya in the Pali language. That means, in English, an unthinkable law. You cannot grasp it completely with your limited thoughts, because we only remember fractions, and therefore we cannot see the whole picture. Unless you are a fully enlightened Buddha, they seem to be able to see exactly, this comes from there, this comes from there. So the law of karma is very important, but it's not the only law. And then if we continue thinking about the influence, for instance, of the climate, the physical climate, you know, whether you grow up in a very cold climate, like in Greenland, for instance, you know, if you are an Eskimo, that has a very big influence on your life. You will have to probably kill animals to live. And then the question comes up, can an Eskimo become a Buddhist, for instance? So, or are they damned because they have to kill animals? Or if you live in a very tropical rainforest, where there is malaria and all kind of other diseases, scorpions and poisonous snakes or things like that, has a very big influence on your life. Or if you are born in Chicago or in California or in a, let's say, a dictatorial country, you know, the political climate, the social climate, the economic climate, and you know, your peer groups, also your friends and your teachers, all of that has an influence on your life. So you cannot say that everything that you meet is just because of your karma, but also because of these other factors which we are enumerating. And that's a whole complex. Sometimes people change, you know, they emigrate, for instance, from a cold place to a warm place, or if they don't like the heat, maybe they will move to a cooler place or something like that. That also will influence your life. So any decision that you take will have a different outcome on the rest of your life. And then, if we look at what is called the Chitta Niyama, or the mind in itself, well, the mind, according to Buddhism, you know, a human being is body and mind. And if you want to split it up into 5 sort of what they call heaps or factors, then we can say there is the physical body, which is our biological body, and then there is what is called feelings or sensations, both physical sensations and mental feelings. Those are coming under a certain category which we call Vedana, or feelings. They're pleasant, unpleasant, and neutral, physical and mental feelings. That is all part of a mental kind of a mind experience. You know, the body in itself doesn't experience anything. If it's in deep sleep, for instance, or if you have a dead body without the mind, then it doesn't experience anything. But when there's the mind and it's awake, then it experiences the body and these kind of feelings and sensations, pleasant and unpleasant and neutral feelings. And then there is what we call perception, to be aware of what's happening around you. And even within you, also it includes memory, to look back on events within your own mind, for instance. And then we have what is called intentions, which we already mentioned under karma. Good intentions, bad intentions, based on positive things like generosity, loving kindness, compassion, and wisdom would be called good intentions. And those intentions based on greed, hatred, jealousy, and ignorance would be called unskillful or bad intentions. So based on that, we say the intentions are a group of factors which also are part of our mind. And then the contents of your consciousness, like what you have seen, what you've heard, what you have smelled, what you have tasted, what you have felt, and what you have thought, what we call the five physical senses plus the mind. So the mind itself is a very complex thing, and if we just say body and mind, well, in English the word mind is one word, but in the Pali language and the Buddha's teachings, they use different terms for different kind of factors within that, what we just call mind. So as a human being, we have the mind, and there's another word in Pali which is called manas. Now manas is the root of man, mankind, including women, of course, woman. But mankind is a being that has both a physical body and a mind. Not to say that animals don't have minds, but probably they don't have the same kind of development of the mind as human beings. Some animals are very clever and intelligent, you know, like the dolphins and maybe certain kind of apes and other kind of what we call animals. But the human being seems to be the being that has the possibility to really choose and to be self-conscious and to do something or not to do something, not just because of instinct, but because of reasoning and consideration. Is this good? Is this bad? Shall I do it? Shall I not do it? So for that, the Buddha gave a very simple advice, you know, when he was enlightened at the age of 35, which is last month. It was exactly 2,601 years ago that the Buddha got enlightened in Bodh Gaya, according to the Ashokan historical accounting. And we celebrated that event for a whole year in the Buddhist countries, 2,600 years of Buddha's enlightenment. And before that, it was 2,555 years of Buddhism, which started counting after the Buddha's demise, actually. Strangely enough, you know, with Christ, people start counting from the year that he was born. But in the case of the Buddha, they started counting when he died. There's an expression in the Himalayas, in Ladakh, in Ladakhi language, which says, Buddhist wisdom always comes late. But anyway, now people woke up after 2,600 years of the Buddha's enlightenment. That's actually 2,600 years that Buddha's teachings have been around. And next full moon in July, it will be exactly 2,601 years that his first teachings, what they call the setting in motion of the wheel of the Dharma, took place, the Dhammacakka Pavattana Sutta. And that was the beginning, really, of Buddhism and Buddhist dispensation. And within that, you find these 5 Niyamas here and there mentioned, you know, as the laws which we are governed by, not like a central agency up in the sky who regulates everything, but more different forms of well, physical and mental and karmic kind of influences and natural influences that have everything to do with what is happening to us in this lifetime and over the many lifetimes also. So, having that mind is sometimes also a problem, no? Like we feel privileged as human beings, and the human birth is considered the most supreme type of rebirth that we can have. But on the other hand, human beings are also suffering, especially because, well, not only physical illnesses, but also because of the mind. The mind can be your best friend, and the mind can be your worst enemy. That's actually said by the Buddha also. You can find that in the Dhammapada. And therefore it is also so very important to guard our mind and to cultivate our mind. It's not enough just to brush your teeth and to dress up, you know, and have a shower, well, before you dress up anyway, and then, you know, to tend after your body only and feed it. Nowadays with more and more health food, of course, not with the junk food that we used to eat. But anyway, the physical body we tend to pay a lot of attention to and spend a lot of money on cosmetics, for instance, you know, to try to look younger than you really are, for instance. But still, the mind is very often overlooked. And the Buddha said, no, you have to attend to your mind as well. Brush up your mind and cultivate it, you know, cultivate mindfulness, cultivate awareness, cultivate good qualities, such as loving kindness and compassion, and also wisdom, and maybe patience, generosity, and all these kind of things. So the mind is a very important factor in this Pancha Niyamas also. And through meditation and the development of concentration and of wisdom and of good qualities, which are called paramitas or perfections, you can actually cultivate the mind and then become a sort of happier, more peaceful, and a higher sort of human being than you were before. If you were in the dark, you can come out of the darkness towards the light. If you were in the light, you can go from light to light and eventually to full enlightenment. So that is where the Buddha made a big difference also in the world history. Of course, he did say that there have been previous Buddhas, but with long, long periods in between. And once in a while, there is a person who comes and, you know, discovers what is called the Four Noble Truths, the truth of the unsatisfactoriness of conditioned existence, then the truth of the causes of that kind of suffering that we are undergoing because of the change and because of our ignorance and because of our clinging, our grasping, our attachments, our negativities. And then to discover another kind of dimension, which is what's called nirvana, which is not made up of any kind of sound or sight or smell or taste or feeling or thought, but goes beyond thought and concept. And it is a reality which one can realize not somewhere in the distant future or outside of yourself, but within oneself. Sometimes the preparations may take lifetimes, but it can be realized by each one wise person for oneself, the Buddha says. And he has shown it as a human being, we can do that. And that is the difference between other, you know, in the cosmology of Buddhism, or the kind of worlds that he talks about, the 6 levels of existence. Like the human level is sort of in the middle with a mixture of happiness and unhappiness. Like gain and loss, fame and blame, and health and sickness, and those kind of things that we are experiencing as human beings. Well, that is typical the human situation. But in Shakespeare, for instance, you know, when Hamlet was desperate and he was thinking of killing himself, he said, to be or not to be, that is the question. And whether it's nobler in the mind to suffer the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, or to fight them and by opposing end them, to die, perhaps to dream, he says. That is a reference by Shakespeare that there may be a kind of a bardo or an interstate between lifetimes or reincarnation. But still, that idea of to be or not to be, to kill yourself, to overcome your problems, that is not exactly the Buddhist way. The Buddha said, you know, there is suffering, there is conflict, and the whole samsaric existence is a form of unsatisfactoriness. Even the human happiness that we experience is not permanent. Therefore, it is also a source of, well, dissatisfaction. It's like that song, oh, is that all there is? You know, like it comes and it goes. So what we usually do as human beings, we tend to grasp the pleasant things and we want to hold on to them and have more of it. Then we start clinging to it and fearing that we may lose it. And we try to avoid the unpleasant, which we cannot always avoid. So the Buddha said this is the human condition. It is a mixture of happiness and unhappiness. And you have to face it and to understand it, that it's actually changing all the time. Nothing is really permanent in this conditioned existence. Not in human beings, not in animals, not in devas and brahmas or hellish existence. Is not a permanent hell, no permanent heaven, and no permanent life on earth, and not even permanent life in heaven. The devas also have to come down, you know, like the group, the falling angels were saying, it's a long way down. That means from that lofty heavenly sphere of subtle happiness that you may experience because of very good karma and be reborn in the deva realm for some time, then that also has its own beginning, middle and end, and the devas have to come down sometimes with a bang to another level, like maybe the human level again, and learn maybe or realize more wisdom, that all these things are really impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not really me, mine, myself, or my own. Now sometimes, you know, that is a difficult thing to understand when the Buddha is considered to be what they call an anatmavadi, a philosopher who says there's no Atman or self. Because Atman, as you know, even in Theosophy and in Hinduism, is considered to be an unchanging, everlasting sort of soul or self. But the Buddha says, well, there is maybe something which is unconditioned, or there is something which is unconditioned, but you should not identify with that as yourself. And even the conditioned things, like your body, your feelings, your thoughts, your intentions, your consciousness, you should not identify with that, this is really me, mine, and my own. In one way it is. The Buddha said, you know, there's this relative reality. If you look at it from this point of view, this is your body, your feelings, your intentions, your karma. You are the inheritor of your karma. There is a you and there is a self. But on the other hand, from a deeper level or a higher level, there's no permanent self in any of this. If you were the real owner of it, then you should be able to keep your body exactly the way you want forever. Now it has not been able, except for people like Babaji maybe, who could, you know, materialize and dematerialize his 16-year-old body for 400 or 800 years. But most people cannot do that. Even the Buddha could not do this. And you cannot keep the things the way that you want. So if you were the owner, he says, in the real sense of the word, then you should be able to keep your feelings the way that you want, your body and your mind exactly the way that you want, and that is not the case. So therefore, everything is impermanent and non-self. Even the idea that there is no matter, or that things are what is called insubstantial or empty. There's a term in Buddhism called emptiness, especially worked out in the Madhyamika philosophy of Nagarjuna in the 2nd century AD. In Mahayana Buddhism you find that more, but even in the original teachings of the Buddha there is a thing called the emptiness of matter, or the emptiness of self, that there's no self. So how can we understand with a sort of worldly example the insubstantiality of matter. Well, let's look at an example, a diamond. Diamonds are forever, or are they? You know, if you look at a diamond, the history of a diamond, for instance, it could be that this diamond, before it became a diamond, was actually a rainforest that was going under the earth and being compressed and compressed and compressed with heat and pressure. It became anthracite, coal, and later on it became a diamond. Some of it became diamonds. So, well, even the diamond as a rough stone is not that beautiful unless you really cut it and make it beautiful, brilliant. Then it becomes what we call a valuable diamond. But if you then look into the diamond, and especially under a microscope, and especially an electronic microscope, you will start to see that there are molecules and all kind of particles twirling around with a lot of space in between. If you go deeper and deeper into the diamond, into the matter, you start seeing that there's no matter, but it's just energy, waves, nothing really to hold on to at the deepest level. So what we call the ultimate reality of matter is that there is no matter. But that's very difficult to live with. You can't say, invest in a diamond if you really believe that it doesn't exist, for instance. So we have what is called the relative reality and the absolute reality, a deeper level. And that helps us also not to cling to the diamond, not to cling to your body or to your feelings or to your thoughts. The Buddha gave very good advice, and I think that is one of the best advices he has ever given, not to cling to concepts. Concept of self, the concept of me, the concept of anything. Even the concept, of the truth that people have. If we don't have the whole truth, we haven't realized the whole truth, and we cling to a concept, then you are having, after some time, religious wars starting. If more people cling to that concept than other people cling to that concept, it can become to a clash. Or even between husband and wife, if they cling to a certain concept, their idea of the reality, and they keep on clinging to that particular idea or concept of themselves, their ego, then that can also cause to clashes. So, not clinging to concept is a very deep and very valuable teaching of the Buddha, and I think that is one of the reasons why Buddhism has never been spread by the sword, so to speak, only for the welfare and happiness of the many, in a very gentle way, and only if people really wanted it, never by force. Never a drop of blood has been shed in the name of Buddhism. So that's a great thing. That's probably also because of this concept, not only concept, that attitude of not clinging to any concepts. So anyway, the Five Niyamas that I was supposed to talk about this evening, also include the natural influences from, as I said earlier, the moon and the sun and the stars, the planets, and the constellations, and everything that is coming in through us, to us, from nature. So nature on this earth and the influences from outside the earth on us also. So for instance, we see that with sunspots, for instance, the economy and agriculture also is being influenced. What we call the conjuncture in the economy, going up and down of economy, sometimes have to do with sunspots. And the kind of harvests, the droughts and the floods and things like that also can have to do something with sunspots. So you can't say that the sun hasn't anything to do with the earth. Actually, we came from the sun. There are people who worship the sun. Surya Namaskaram, even in the yoga, is to worship the sun as the source of all life on earth. Basically, that's true. But not as a kind of god or person, but even as a force. Well, and of course, the sun is just part of a whole big universe which is expanding and expanding. Another thing that the Buddha said is there's not just one solar system, and not 5 or 10, not 100, but limitless solar systems. Now can you imagine 2,600 years ago, without the Hubble telescope, he already saw that in his mind and in his perception of the universe, that it was an unlimited universe of unlimited number of solar systems, for instance. And that there was a possibility of life on other planets as well. An intergalactic reincarnation, if you like. That sounds lovely, doesn't it? Except you don't know exactly where you have to go to be reincarnated if you don't know the destination. But anyway, the kind of things that the Buddha already knew, even the fact that matter is really insubstantial and it's empty of hard matter, that is also one of the things that he taught. So he had an extremely, what we call, developed mind, and his knowledge was like without limits. He could know just about anything. And but he said, even if there's everything that we can know in the universe, we don't need everything. We don't need to know everything. If you can just, like he held up some leaves and he says, "Oh, monks, what is more, the leaves in my hands or the leaves on all these trees?" To say it, of course, the leaves on all the trees. It's much more. He said, "But you know, I have got this much to tell you, and this is enough for your liberation from suffering and your edification. You can reach nirvana if you just follow these few things. You don't need to know everything under the sun, or beyond the sun also." So that is another very deep teaching, and in simple terms by the Buddha. And he actually explained how to develop this mind of ours, and that is probably the best and most valuable thing that he has left to humanity, how to overcome conflict and suffering within yourself, and how to realize the characteristics of life, and to diminish your own causes of suffering, which are based on our so-called ignorance, or not seeing the things as they really are. And the thing that we don't realize is what is called the unconditioned, that there is such a thing. Maybe we know, or we may have heard of it, but we have to realize it for ourselves. And that is what the Buddha did 2,601 years ago under the Bodhi tree. He realized not only all these laws of interdependence, there were other laws of interdependence and interdependent together arising, what he called just before his enlightenment. He realized, for instance, he said, "I found you, O carpenter. You are the builder of this house. I've been ignorant all this time." The ignorance of the truth was the problem, and that kept me going from life to life. I used to die with ignorance, and I was born with ignorance, and at the end of the next lifetime there was still ignorance, and that kept me going through the ocean of existence, samsara. And when he broke through that ignorance at his enlightenment at the age of 35, seated under the Bodhi tree, or the Ficus religiosa as it is called nowadays, botanically, he realized, this is the main cause. The culprit is the ignorance. Because of ignorance we get karmic formation, we create karma. In order to experience that karma, we get a body and a mind, in order to, experience that karma. And because of the body and the mind, we have these senses, 5 physical senses, the eyes, the ears, the nose, the tongue, the body, plus the 6th sense, the mind. And because we have these 6 senses, we get in touch with, or we get contact or bombarded by objects of the senses. And when these senses come in contact with objects, then pleasant and unpleasant feelings start to arise. And as most people like the pleasant and dislike the unpleasant, they start clinging to the pleasant and craving for more and trying to get away from the unpleasant. But they cannot always avoid that. So that's part of the problem. And then, because of that, when you crave for more and you cling to what you have, and especially the pleasant, you start having a process of becoming, psychological becoming. I want to become this, I want to have this, I want a heavenly rebirth, or I want a rebirth in California, or maybe in Hawaii, or something like that. Or in Deva Lokas, maybe it's more pleasant there. Of course, that also depends not only on your wish, but also on your state of mind when you pass away, and on your previous karma. So all that together, that whole process of becoming, is taking place as long as there's some trace of ignorance. Not to see that there is the heaven is basically within you, and the real happiness cannot be found out there, but can be realized within you. So nirvana is not some heaven out there, but something that one can realize within. And if that is realized, then you don't need to go anywhere. And then the whole thing sort of fizzles out, and there's no more reason for a rebirth unless you choose to be a bodhisattva. That is yet the other possibility, of course. Not that most Theravadins are specialists in that, but the accent is on self-enlightenment and sort of, bye, enough is enough, and you figure it out for yourself. But the bodhisattva idea would be, well, these poor people and these poor creatures, they need our help, and we should do something for others and postpone our final exit till everybody is ready. So the bodhisattva ideal would be to stay in samsara, not because you like it, but because you think it's the best place to cultivate paramitas, good qualities, and also to help other suffering beings. And out of that compassionate ground, according to Mahayana Buddhism also that is said, you can actually choose to be reborn, not out of ignorance, although a little trace of ignorance may be there, but mostly because of what they call compassion for other beings. Theravada Buddhists might say, well, that is an impracticable proposition, because will it ever really happen that everybody is ready to be enlightened? Well, the world wants to be deceived, and therefore it's being deceived, and people prefer to live in the bliss of ignorance rather than to find the hard reality sometimes, which turns into nectar once you realize it. So, you know, with all these considerations of the five niyamas, of the seed, and of our karma, and of the climate, and of our mind, and the physical and natural influences, we have quite a few things, I suppose, food for thought enough, but then we also have to transcend thought probably and let go of it in order to find that which transcends thoughts. And I wish that everybody who has been here tonight, and even those who are watching, will have benefited from the teachings of the Buddha and become free and happy human beings with more and more and more peace and happiness and compassion and wisdom, and eventually attain the final liberation from all dukkha or suffering and attain the bliss of nirvana. May you be well, peaceful, and happy.
Thank you very much, Bhante. And before the talk, I did ask whether the Venerable would take questions, and he has agreed to take questions from both the people present in the hall and those online. So if you do have a question, please wait for me to bring the microphone to you so that it can be recorded. There is a question online, so I may as well begin with that while you get yours ready. Oh, the question is very short, Bhante. Why or how is it that we are here?
Probably because we wanted to be here, or whether we like it or not. Or maybe because of, well, the basic thing, if you go deeper, it is because of ignorance that we are here. That is the short answer. And long answer may take some time. But you mean here, I suppose the person who's asking that, I don't know where they're from. Does it say where they're from or who it is?
No, it did not
No, it doesn't say.
No.
Well, in general, we are here on this earth Well, maybe if you want another kind of, why are we here in the sense of what's the purpose of us being here? Is that what you're meaning? I don't know. And very often it is the purpose that we give our own life, that we create ourselves. And some people say, well, the purpose of life is to realize the final truth, and that we are going through a number of lessons through our karma and our actions and reactions, that finally we have to learn that it is beyond action and reaction that the final bliss is. But in the meantime, we can be what you could say, kind and loving people, helping each other and oneself to go up the ladder of what is called evolution, you see. There was this boy who was going to school, and he came home and said to his mother, "I'm confused, mother. In the biology class they say that it was Darwin who explained how the world was coming, the evolution. And in my religious class they say that God created the world, and who is right?" Then the mother said, "Well, both were right. God created the world, but Darwin explained how he did it."
Does anyone have questions?
Oh,
yes.
several. Yes.
It seems that trying to solve karma with intent is almost recursive.
To solve karma with what?
Intent.
Or with intent?
It seems
Yes.
like the intention itself is as a result of karma. Sometimes I have difficulty with that concept.
Right. That's a very interesting question. Very interesting question. Thank you. Yes. And people like J. Krishnamurti, for instance, would say that there is this unconditioned, the otherness, and there is this conditioned existence. And if you are going to recondition your conditioned existence or your mind by having better intentions, for instance, trying to do better and create good deeds and do good karma, then you're just reconditioning the conditions. You're not really coming out of the conditioned. So there is a kind of a qualitative leap between conditioning and the unconditioned. So how to come to the unconditioned is the big question. Can you do that through karma, bettering your karma, or do you have to realize something and maybe let go of that pattern of the past karma? So until and unless we have come to that state of realization, it's better to create good karma than to create bad karma, I suppose. Building up some good karma doesn't hurt. But to expect that you can really come to liberation from, conditioned existence by just doing good doesn't work in the end. There has to be a stage where you realize the the unsatisfactoriness of all conditioned existence, and also the causes of our own continuation of that unsatisfactoriness, and then maybe to realize that it's not really me, mine, and my own, and I shouldn't interfere. Even with meditations, you can say that real meditation starts when I am not here. So I usually say to my students of meditation, well, in that case, shall I leave the hall so that you can meditate? Or for instance, that wisdom starts where knowledge ends. In the Vedanta philosophy, Veda means knowledge, Anta means end. So real wisdom starts where knowledge ends. But the Vedantins take 12 years to study the scriptures and then come to the conclusion that real wisdom starts where knowledge ends. And J. Krishnamurti would ask, very naughtily, couldn't they realize that from the beginning? Yes.
Yes, I had a question about Dharma. Um, I was studying something from the internet about concerning yoga, and it said that yoga teaches that Dharma is stages of life. For example, the baby's Dharma is to suck his mother, for example, and then the above it just keeps getting higher than that. Where the students, the teenage is the student phase, for example, things like this, and then it goes on to the householder's phase. Dharma is the adult Dharma, maybe, and then the recluse or the renunciation.
Yes.
So I was wondering what you thought of what is the definition then of Dharma?
Very good. Okay. Because what you are quoting is actually from Hinduism and the stages of life of a student, of a householder, of a recluse, and of a sannyasi in the end. So in that sense, the word Dharma has a different meaning than when we say Dharma or Dhamma in Buddhism. And even the word Dhamma or Dharma in Buddhism has many different meanings. So in the case of the stages of life, what is the Dharma of a baby? What is the Dharma of a youngster, of a person who is a householder, somebody who is sort of retreating from that and then becomes a recluse, towards the end sannyas? Those are the stages of life and the duties, in a way. Dharma is sometimes called as your duty, your dharmic duty. So in the case of Dharma, when we say Dhamma Niyama, for instance, that Dhamma word is there. Dharma in Sanskrit, Dhamma in Pali. But that has a completely different meaning. That means nature, the things as they really are, or the nature of things. And sometimes Dhamma means the teachings of the Buddha. Sometimes Dhamma means righteousness. Dhamma can have many different meanings. But in the case of your example of the stages of life, it would be that is your duty as a child is like this, your duty as a householder is like this, duties more or less your natural or your spiritual duties, you could say.
One more question here.
Does the Buddha, obviously must have some comments, what does the Buddha have to say about death? What's its place? What's its significance?
Right. Well, the Buddha, what we call the historical Buddha, Sakyamuni, said that death is a kind of, process of the body disintegrating, and it is inevitable. It is the surest thing that we have in life. Life is uncertain, and death is certain. Only thing is, we don't know how we're going to die and when we're going to die. But that we're going to die is sure. And death is also something that takes place from moment to moment. There is what we call, the final moment of death, when the body dies. But then, what happens to the mind, or the mental energy, or the stream of consciousness? If you look at a person as a body and a mind, then that stream of consciousness still has, if there is enough ignorance and craving, enough energy to continue with all that karmic force from behind, from the previous lives, and the accumulated karma from this lifetime. If that still works, then that stream of consciousness will search for another body, basically, or another level of existence in these levels of, the human, the animal, the deva, the brahma, or the hellish realms, according to the state of mind that that person dies in. And if they die in a very, very peaceful and very, very happy state of deep absorption, maybe in a meditative state, they may go to a very pleasant place for a long time. And if they die with anger, then maybe they will go to a sort of suffering state. There is an example given I cannot really prove it, but then this is a story that goes around in Buddhist history, that Emperor Ashoka, who was a very good person, first he was a very terrible ruler, and later on he got influenced by Buddha's teachings. He became a righteous ruler. He became a Dharma king, Dharma Raja, and then he did a lot of good things. He spread Buddhism, but when he was dying, somebody was fanning him, and by mistake the fan hit his head, and he got very angry and he died in a state of rage. Well, and then the story goes that he was therefore reborn as a snake. But fortunately, or unfortunately, well, let's say fortunately, he only had to live for 7 days as a snake and was then reborn in Tusita Devaloka, or the kind of heavenly realm. I don't know who went there to check it, but you know, that's what they say. Maybe clairvoyants could have seen that he was reborn there.
I don't know if my question, if you can respond, is the stream of consciousness similar or compared to the spirit, the I am, or the soul of the individual?
That's a very deep question, and I cannot guarantee a correct answer to every question, you know. But I would say there are similarities, definitely. It depends on what you want to call it, I suppose. You know, the definition of soul or stream of consciousness or I am. That is, yeah, what is it actually that is then that stream of consciousness? We could call it the mind. You could call it your soul. But it is a stream which is changing, you know. Whereas the soul in the Hindu definition of Atman, or the self with a capital S, is considered to be an unchanging, everlasting, eternal something that doesn't change, but it goes from life to life to life to life. And in that case, I would say, if you want to compare and try to understand that there can be only one reality, it's just different kind of definitions, different interpretations maybe of what's happening, that what we call the unconditioned, which is not an individual soul, you know, is not really me, mine, or myself. That's what the Buddha says. And what he refers to as the changing stream of consciousness could be called your mind. But when you say I am and my soul, then you may be referring more to that unconditioned and something eternal. And in that case, the Buddha said, that is not you, but there is such a thing as an unconditioned. But don't try to identify yourself with that, because that in itself could lead to a subtle form of rebirth in a long-lasting sort of maybe Brahma realm. Sorry?
Sounds good.
Yeah, sounds good. Would you like to go there?
Yeah.
And you know, one day in the Brahma realm, what seems to be like one day in the Brahma realm is taking about 1,000 years on Earth. So if you spend a couple of Brahma days there, you might not recognize this world when you come back. You feel like a stranger. That is good enough.
We have one more question
One
from
more
the back
question.
here.
Yes, please.
Yes, you said a moment ago about wisdom starting where knowledge ends. I'd like to hear a little bit about what you think the difference is between the two, and those of us who try to seek wisdom, how we can not confuse knowledge for wisdom, if you understand.
Yes, I'm trying to understand. And I think I understand, but I don't know whether I really understand. But let's see what we can say about it. When you're saying seeker of wisdom, you know, you can, for instance, you can read wisdom books. You can go to wisdom teachings, and those are laid down in books and words and concepts and philosophies and things like that, maybe from historical teachers usually, like the Buddha or Lao Tzu or Jesus or Muhammad or, you know, great spiritual teachers, Rumi or people like that. And then you could sort of, or Krishnamurti, you could then start repeating those sayings of the wise people, but that is not your wisdom. That is second-hand knowledge, I would say. You know? But if you would realize the truth beyond those words, what they are pointing at, just like the finger is pointing at the moon, but you should not confuse the finger with the moon. You know, the moon is the reality, you're just pointing towards that, and these words are pointing towards something which is actually the reality, but the word is not the thing, as Krishnamurti says very clearly. So the word nirvana is not the realization of nirvana, for instance.
If I could, so knowledge points to truth, whereas wisdom by itself is actually more truth.
The realization of truth, I would say, yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, and there are two more questions in the front.
How would a Buddhist handle negative feelings that seem naturally to arise in this human existence? Do they continually fight them, or at some point they just never arise?
Well, at some point probably they never arise. At the stage of enlightenment, they probably will not arise again. But until we are enlightened, negative feelings, negativities would probably arise, even in a person who is considered to be a stream enterer. They still have negativities of greed and hatred in certain amount, and then even people who go beyond that stage before they reach arahathood, they still have traces of negativities. So the question is how to handle it, how to look at it. Do we fight it, or do we replace it, or do we just look at it and let go of it, for instance, you know? Or do we just try to understand this is a negative feeling and realize these negative feelings are no good for anything, and why should I continue having this negative feeling? Well, you cannot get rid of it by judging it and suppressing it and fighting it, because you're just sort of transforming it and maybe making it even worse than before. So realizing that there are these negativities, and then you can maybe look at it as, yeah, this is a negative emotion, for instance. And every emotion, whether it's negative or positive, is something that is also caused by cause and effect. It's not really you, yourself, you know, your real me, but it is probably created by something that happened in our course of our life or lives. Maybe from even a previous life, or maybe from situations in this life. So as long as there is this, you know, negative attitude towards negativity, you know, a hatred against negativity, for instance, or an aversion against negativity, you're only feeding it. It's like pouring fuel onto fire. But if you watch it, so that is the role of mindfulness and equanimity and a sense of detachment, where you can look at it and it sort of peters out by itself.
Revisiting his question versus knowledge and wisdom.
Yes.
It could be said that the knowledge is acquired through the mind more so than, I think wisdom comes when you meditate and you make a connection of some sort. And, you know, it's a long time. I mean, it's not a one-time process. It's a long process, but in meditating and quieting the mind, the chatting mind that acquires knowledge, I believe, or I sense that maybe wisdom comes through somehow. I have a sense that the wisdom comes through the sitting in the presence of something greater than yourself, like
Okay.
in the heart. And the, you know,
The
like
heart, okay.
The
So when you say the mind, you mean more the brain, the thinking brain?
The thinking brain,
Yes,
the
the
thinking,
accumulating
the
brain.
intellect, the
Okay.
intellect.
Yes.
And the other is like
The heart and
like
the
compassion,
realization.
like the wisdom of compassion, the wisdom of caring, of loving.
Yes, well, that is quite a complex question or remark. I think you're right. Again, when you say wisdom comes from meditation and it is a long process, we could also say, on the other hand, wisdom is not an accumulation. And wisdom in itself doesn't take time, but to realize that wisdom, sometimes the preparations can take very long. Like the sudden school in Zen Buddhism, for instance, you know, Zen doesn't take time, but it can take ages before you realize that. A moment of satori or whatever, or enlightenment itself.
So could you say that wisdom is a sense of realization?
Yes, wisdom is a sense of realization, probably a sense of realization of the timeless, the deathless, the birthless, and the unconditioned.